Hello, I'm Rana Mohie, and today I'll be presenting on the impact of international reserves accumulation, a project that was mentored by Dr. Claudia Sam. So first, a quick background on why this question was interesting. So the levels of international reserves hoarding by central banks have significantly increased during the past 3 decades. It has reached 30% of the GDP in 2018, rising from about 5% in 1990. Given this significant increase, studying both the benefits and costs of reserves was interesting. Given that the objective of the research is to empirically test for both the benefit and second order costs of reserve accumulation by answering the below questions. First, on the benefits of reserves. During episodes of capital flow reversals, or what is known as sudden stops, are countries with higher level of reserves accumulation, or those that use the reserves more during crisis, more able to cushion the impact on output? Second, does an increase in hoarding reserves by central banks cause a decrease in domestic credit growth due to competing with private sector? Given the theoretical literature available, two hypotheses are made on for the previous questions. First, for the first question, the hypothesis is that a higher level of foreign reserve would help governments smooth consumption by depleting these reserves during episodes of liquidity crisis or sudden stops or sovereign risk. For the second question on the cost of distortionary cost of reserves, an increase in hoarding reserves by central banks will cause a decrease in domestic credit growth due to competing with private sector for funds in the domestic financial markets. This project has three main contributions. The first one is that I'm using a panel of large number of sudden stops covering an extended period of time, while previous literature mostly focused on one global or a smaller number of regional crises. Second, I'm also using a novel definition of sudden stops where I'm focusing on exogenous sudden stops. And third, I'm testing for the crowding out effect of foreign reserve purchase on domestic credit growth, which was pointed out in theoretical literature but not studied empirically. Now, for the first part of the project, which is defining what is a sudden stop. So, since I'm interested in looking at exogenous sudden stops, I combined two definitions that are widely used in the literature. The first one by Ford and Warnock, 2012, which focus on isolating the effect of a sudden stop driven by non-residents. And the second is by Calvo, which aims at isolating sudden stops that are caused by global exogenous factors rather than by macroeconomic fundamentals in the specific country. Now, for the second part of the project, which is answering the two questions. So the first one is estimating the benefit of reserve holding, conditional on having a sudden stop. Since I'm conditioning on the occurrence of sudden stop, I can pull together the episodes of sudden stops that were identified in the data, and I use a cross-section regression with I being country, T being time, and it has country fixed effect. And the main variable, independent variable, is the reserve depletion or the negative change in the level of reserves, which would indicate that central bank is injecting reserve money into the market to counter the effect of capital reversal. And the dependent variable is the growth in GDP or the decline in GDP during the sudden stop. I also control for variables that come up in the literature that they may have an effect on output during a sudden stop, like the level of current account and external debt, as well as the intensity of the crisis, for which I use as proxy capital reversal. Now for the second part, or the second question, which is the distortionary cost of reserves, I use a panel vector autoregression to examine if there are dynamic effects on domestic credit growth from increasing reserve level by central bank purchase. For this, this is the model I use. I also have country fixed effect, which is FI, and ZI includes these variables. The main variable of interest is domestic credit growth, where I see if a shock to the level of international reserves, which would mean central bank purchasing more reserves, have a negative impact on domestic credit growth. Now here I talk about the identification assumptions I employ. And finally, on the results, we see that during in the left panel we have periods of expansion in liquidity, like capital flows are like flowing normally, while on the right panel we have contraction in global liquidity or global capital flows slow down. And the crowding out effect or the negative impact of international reserves on domestic credit growth only appear in the right panel where we have contraction in capital flows. This is in line with the prediction of the model. However, when we have periods of expansion, we don't have this effect. We have, in fact, positive, like an opposite effect. So, a model that reconcile these empirical findings with the existing theoretical framework would be of interest.